Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to our philosophy talk for today, the first one at 1 p.m. So yeah, before we begin, I hope all of you can hear and see all of us. If you can't just leave us a message on the Zoom chat to let us know that you're facing some technical difficulties, and we'll see what we can do from here for you, yeah? All right, so yeah, just a quick introduction. So my name is Joy, and I'm a Year 2 Philosophy Student Ambassador. Welcome to the School of Humanities Philosophy Talk, titled An Introduction to the Philosophy Program and How It's Taught at NTU. So yeah, before we proceed with today's session, I would like just to remind all of you who have yet to change your display name to just kindly change it to your full name. So like if you can see all four of us, we have our full names at the bottom of our screens. So sorry about that. Yep, so this is how you can do it. Just follow these 3 steps to change your name to your full names so that in the event that you want to interact with us later on, we know how to address you. Yep. Okay, so next we just have a few house rules for this virtual session. So yeah, just spend some time to read through them and then we'll get started very soon. Okay, so let me invite 2 of our professors here, Professor Andrew Fossheims and Dimitri Apostolopoulos. Yep, just to kickstart the session for us. So Professor Fossheims, please.
Okay. So what I'm going to share with you now is just some brief slides about the curriculum, and in addition, we'll talk a little bit about the placement, how our philosophy students have gotten jobs and things like that at the end. Okay, so this will take about 10 minutes, and then we'll turn to some questions about that Demetrius and I will talk about in terms of what philosophy is, what we work on, and why you might want to study philosophy. Okay, so very roughly, you can think of the requirements for philosophy as falling into 2 broad categories. There are the major requirements, and then there are the general NTU requirements. So within the major requirements, we have our core requirements and our prescribed electives, and your final year project, which is number 6 here. The general education requirements we won't be focusing on here, since this is the point of this meeting is to get you acquainted with philosophy. And it's also the case that if you come to NTU, those requirements will be changing pretty significantly, and I think positive ways for the new incoming classes. Okay, so I think this is an easier way to understand the philosophy requirements. So you can see that you have some core requirements, and so you're going to take 7 core philosophy courses. I'll talk more about that in just a moment, but things like intro to philosophy, logic, Chinese philosophy, ancient philosophy, modern philosophy, things like that are considered to be sort of core philosophy modules. And then you'll have some prescribed electives, which will allow you to, it will kind of afford you the opportunity to further investigate the things that you may be particularly interested in when you took, say, intro or logic or Chinese philosophy. Then you'll be able to take more advanced versions of those classes and dig a little bit deeper at the 300 and the 400 level. So you'll take 7 courses, and you can chart your own trajectory. And then lastly, there are 4 what are called interdisciplinary prescribed elective courses. And those are courses that are not within philosophy itself, but instead they're courses that are highly relevant to how you might think about philosophy or cater to some particular interest. So you might be interested more in economic theory. So this offers you the chance to go and take something from the economics department, say economic thought, or you may be interested more in political philosophy or international relations, and you could go take something from PVGA, say on public relations or something like that. Or you may be more interested in philosophy of mind, so you might take, say, cognitive psychology, something like that. So these are courses that will allow you take them in order to satisfy your philosophy credits, but they come from other disciplines because, especially nowadays, philosophers need to be informed about sort of what's going on in other areas, especially the areas that they're working on. Okay, so and then finally, in terms of the main kind of classification, you'll do an FYP project, assuming that you meet the cutoff for your GPA. And what that allows you to do is focus on something that you're extremely interested in, that you want to learn more about. And for a full year, you'll research that topic closely with a professor or an FYP supervisor, and then you'll do a bunch of research. You'll write an outline, and then you'll write a long, normally it's about 10,000 word paper, and that will count for two 400 levels classes. If you don't meet the GPA requirements to do an FYP, then you'll just have to take 2 more 400 level classes. Okay, so just looking back, the next few slides will just walk you through, just give you a little bit better sense of what the core courses look like, what the prescribed electives look like, and what the FYP project looks like. Okay, so in terms of the cores, you'll take Introduction to Philosophy, Symbolic Logic, Moral Philosophy, Ancient Philosophy, Modern Philosophy, and then at this point, you'll given our current faculty, you'll take Chinese philosophy, and then philosophy of science or philosophy of technology. Normally, that's how it goes. We have not recently offered Indian philosophy. That's a little bit misleading. As far as I know, we've never offered Indian philosophy, and we haven't offered great ideas and innovations for a while, but we regularly offer Chinese philosophy, philosophy of science, and philosophy of technology. So that's a kind of standard way that the courses will progress. In terms of the major prescribed electives, these are going to be courses that, again, you only need to satisfy. You can take any 7 courses, so you're free to let your interests dictate what you take. Okay, but those will be things like political philosophy, philosophy of mind, existentialism, practical rationality, things like that, or any of these upper level courses, say in Chinese philosophy or philosophy of science, and so forth. Okay, so that's a kind of that will kind of give you a feel of the kind of courses that we offer, and you can look on the website and see a full course offering, as well as look at the kind of trajectory that we've been on for the last few years to get a sense of the kind of courses that we regularly offer, because it's just the case that every program in NTU has more classes on the books than they regularly offer, because faculty sometimes move around and sometimes there's not always someone to teach a course that may be already there. So you want to look not only to see if something you're interested in is on the books, but also whether someone has taught it recently. But normally if there's a demand, it will get taught. And then that takes us to the sort of interdisciplinary prescribed electives. And this is just a sample. You can, as I said before, you can go and there's a list that have been designated as courses that the faculty have decided are philosophically relevant, such that it makes sense for a philosophy major to take them and count them towards their graduation requirements. So political theory, politics in the state. These are ones where, say, if you're interested in political philosophy, it would benefit you to have some sense of sort of, say, what's going on, say in PPGA, and maybe even psychology, things like that. Okay, same goes for philosophy of mind, or whatever. What your interests are will normally dictate what kinds of interdisciplinary prescribed electives you take. Okay, now when it comes to the final year project, this is a long way off, but for the most part, almost, most students end up meeting the GPA requirement to take to do an FYP, and so there's a good chance you will do it, and it's a good opportunity for you to, again, sort of explore an area that you're particularly interested in. Most professors will allow you to research as long as it's philosophically falls within the category of philosophy. We'll be able to find someone that is willing to take on the project that you want to do. And so that allows you to experience what it's like to investigate a sort of a philosophical topic pretty seriously, and in a way that gets you close to how philosophers normally work these days. And so that's a good opportunity. It's a good way for you to gain some independence as a thinker, because normally your profs won't be telling you, what path you should go down. They just say, this is the topic here, this is the topic you want interested in. Maybe you check out these particular books or read these particular thinkers, and the rest is sort of up to you. So I think a lot of students find it pretty rewarding, the FYP, because they feel like they're liberated from doing coursework and things like that. Right. So I think these details we can skip over. But this would be a kind of sample of how you would take a sort of a normal 4-year sort of course to graduate. Okay, so you don't need to be overwhelmed by all these course codes, but basically what you're seeing here is you'll take intro and logic, say in your first semester. In your second semester, you'll take Chinese philosophy, moral philosophy, and then after that, you can start to see things are sort of up to you. You can fill in the details however you see fit, as long as you stay on track to graduate. Okay. So that sort of should give you a kind of overview. If you have any questions, you can feel free to ask about that. So one thing people often ask about are career, your career prospects when you're doing philosophy, and philosophy has a extremely good track record in terms of getting people jobs, and it's unfortunate because that's contrary to what you or your parents might expect. So they might be thinking, look, you do philosophy, you're not going to get a job. Turns out that is false. There's a very good chance. In fact, one of the highest placements in SOH or COAS in terms of we place our students, and they are placed in a wide range of different industries, as you can see off to the right there. And so it's not the case that if you take philosophy, you end up jobless with just some big ideas to think about while you're jobless. No, it turns out you actually do have, you will have a job. So this will give you a kind of sense of where philosophy places with regard to others in the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. As you can see, 96.3% of philosophy majors are employed, and 70%, which is it's worth looking at the how we compare is quite good. We're at 70%, and no one else is that high in terms of full-time permanent employment. And the salary is also quite high, with philosophy majors salaries exceeding almost everyone else except for I think PPGA, if I remember that correctly. Is that right? So that will take us. That kind of concludes sort of the general overview of the course and how philosophy majors.
If I just
please
add in relation to this, just to make it a little bit more concrete for some of the guests who are with us this afternoon. When Professor Forsheim refers to the areas where you can take up jobs, so some of those categories are just kind of general categories. So, but if you want a kind of example, so public administration and defense, for example. So one of our graduates was up, and she got hired in a military intelligence kind of role. That's within the Ministry of Defense, for example. Within the creative sector, we have a student who got a job at the Straits Times. So I mean, that's like journalism, writing related profession, which philosophy trains you very well for. If you may know the company Viharja, the furniture maker, architecture company. So we had a student who got a job there as well. Another student was hired in a law firm. So there's also for big international companies like Fuji and so forth. So this just gives you a very, very small sample of some of the potential destinations you may end up after you study a philosophy degree.
Great. Oh, okay. So if there are no sort of questions or anything about the major requirements or the career prospects, then we can move on to discussing some questions that we thought you might be interested in. And I will stop sharing my screen at this point. So the three kinds of questions that we're going to talk about: what is philosophy? What do you do? What do you do means what do Demetrius and I work on? So that'll help give you a sort of concrete example of what philosophers do. And then finally, why take philosophy? What's the value of doing a philosophy degree? And we'll talk a bit about that. So do you want to take why don't you try answering the first question first? What is philosophy?
So the first point to note is one that you will, as a version of which you will encounter in all of your classes. So many things we say can be qualified. They can be supplemented with other definitions, other takes, other perspectives. But if I were to answer this question, what philosophy is, I would begin by saying that philosophy is the attempt to make sense of the world. Now, that sounds vague, and it is vague. We can make it a bit more specific if you think that, okay, well, what's a basic precondition for having some kind of meaningful experience in the world, for attempting to make sense of things and formulating a position about the nature of reality or the nature of human action, desire, what is good, what is not good. Well, the basic precondition for that is having experience. That is, being in the world as an active agent who feels, perceives, suffers, hopes, etc. So I would say that one of the main themes that philosophy concerns itself with is human experience in the broad sense. So in the sense of thinking, in the sense of feeling, making decisions, making life choices, and so forth. So philosophy can be understood as a rigorous study of all facets of human experience. That's how I would begin, and then within that general framework, I think we can try to maybe narrow things down a bit more specifically. But if I think to one sort of unifying theme that runs through all the areas of philosophy, historical and contemporary. We'll discuss more about that. It should be, I think, something like human experience and how and why human experience is relevant for making sense of our world. So, Andrew, how would you define philosophy?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's also a philosophical question, which I think is maybe worth pointing out. So, so I think you can take this question into one of two ways. So one, you could try to do it in a kind of substantive way to try to identify the target of the sort of the area of inquiry. And in that part, I think I agree pretty closely with what Demetrius said. So I would think that it's something like, a general attempt or to try to come up with a kind of theory, or at least a plausible theory of the nature of reality. So, what things there are, and what are those things? I think maybe are the two maybe central questions. What things exist, and what are the nature of those things? And then you might tag on another kind of clause, which takes you to this sort of second way of taking the question, which is about a certain kind of methodology, or a certain kind of mode of inquiry into how that subject gets investigated. So sometimes when you hear people talk about what is philosophy, they end up latching onto this facet of it, which is that it's maybe coming up with investigating the nature of reality by merely thinking about it, or sometimes they throw in a fancy word. They'll say a priori. I one time heard a philosopher say philosophy is it's a priori investigation, just except for mathematics. So it's everything that's not mathematics oriented, but it's just all a priori stuff. That just means without recourse sort of to experience, or at least you don't need to get your hands dirty and wear a lab coat. You just think about it as a sort of gloss. So yeah, I think if you put those two things, I think there's something right about the by just by thinking about it, or by pure reflection, some aspect of that captures what philosophy does. But you do need to have the clause that it's not simply mathematics. So you would need to somehow supplement it with some latching onto a specific topic, which I do think is something like the nature of reality, broadly understood. So what things exist and what are those things, I think, are the kinds of questions. What do you think about this? That there's a kind of investigation, mode of investigation. So if you wouldn't be a philosopher if you're investigating, how many blades of grass are outside, but you come closer to a philosopher if you were just thinking about what blades of grass are outside, something like that.
Yeah. So to use this example, the difference I assume is that I think what you're getting at is that you can take this, say, grass or plant example, and you study the nature of plants or something. Right? So the person who is not in philosophy would, perhaps run to a biologist or somebody who is educated in the material side of life and say, tell me what it is for something to be alive. But the philosopher will ask, are empirical methods sufficient to tell us what life is, what it is to be alive? Or is, for example, an empirical scientific approach sufficient to explain what matter is. In other words, do the methods of the sciences tell us what the nature of the material world is? And so you may think that's absurd, because why would you ask that kind of question? It seems like it's completely foreign to something that we could consider in philosophy. But in fact, it actually turns out to be very, very difficult within, let's say, just take the example of empirical sciences, to define something like what nature is, or what matter is, or what it is to be alive from within those fields themselves. So these kinds of bigger questions.
Yeah, I think that's right. So yeah, to use an example, maybe this would have been a better one. So I guess there's a kind of debate about whether or not viruses are alive. To use a thing to think about nowadays. So
temporary example.
Yeah, we talk about, okay, well, what does it take? Does washing hands kill the virus or something like that? So, which seems to presuppose that a virus is alive. But notice that it doesn't take a lot of reflection to realize that it does sound a bit odd when you think about, are they alive in the same sense that we're alive if someone kills you? And it's getting into, oftentimes philosophers investigate things that are normally just taken as given in the empirical and social sciences. And because they're interested in these questions about the nature of reality, and they'll try to pin down exactly, what exactly would it take? What's the kind of necessary and sufficient conditions for being alive? And then do viruses meet those conditions, such that it makes sense to say that they have the property of being alive, as opposed to just something else that mimics plants being alive or things like that. So I take it that I think I one time heard someone define philosophy as an investigation into the things that all the other disciplines take for granted. So philosophers investigate, scientists just take it for granted what causation is. Theologians take for granted that God exists and has, they just they kind of come up with, the nature of God and God's plans and how God interacts. But there's a further question about whether or not you could argue or give an argument for God's existence. And so it's those kinds of questions that then philosophers get really hung up on.
Yes, so I would say, for some of you may be listening to this and think, wow, this is very removed from, let's say, a pressing question that we have to address now. But if you think of this example from the virus case, often many of the problems that we face we collectively, not in philosophy departments, but we collectively in humanity face concern they derive from how we define a problem. So they derive from the kinds of assumptions that go into the borders or the boundaries between, say, a problem and another problem, or one problem and the tools necessary to fix or resolve that problem. So one thing that this kind of very radical mode of questioning that philosophy privileges, one thing that philosophy can help with is problem solving in the real world, because it can give someone like scientists theoretical tools to redefine basic issues in their own fields, and that can help them see things anew. And when they see things anew, they can potentially help to resolve them in a better way. So there are ongoing debates in physics in particular about what kinds of things are fundamental, and philosophers are, I think, lately occupying a more and more important role there. So again, not to make this like into a philosophy lecture, but one example is the rise of kind of Aristotelian models in discussions of natural law and how nature is structured. So the kind of picture that nature follows a kind of a post-Newtonian law-like model that has a kind of law-like structure. In the last few decades, this kind of idea has given way to the idea that nature is made up of dynamic powers rather than things like laws. And so explaining what a dynamic power is very difficult if you, focus only on certain kinds of empirical concepts or concepts that come out of sciences on their own terms. So philosophy can very much help with that. So I think there's some of the theoretical questions that appear to be so removed from reality actually are much closer to it, and in fact very intimately connected to what is real. So yeah, perhaps we can, unless
yeah, I mean, yeah. If you think about it, it may seem fine in certain context to just say, okay, yeah, viruses get killed. But you think about it in a kind of a moral context. Most people think that there's some prohibition on intentionally killing things, and so you wouldn't want to say, well, we can't intentionally kill the virus. We commit mass genocide of COVID. This is such this moral abomination or something like that. But then it's hard to specify, because you don't want to say, oh, well, by kill, the kind of impermissible kind of killing I'm interested in is just killing people. And then you would say, okay, well, what about killing, species, like a higher kind of species? Like, what if I just said I want to kill all the dolphins and I go on a mass genocide of dolphins? Is that okay? So, that's not okay. And you wouldn't want to say it's not okay just because people might want to see the dolphins, or they might want to look at. You don't want to relate it back to people. You want to say, well, there's something wrong with the killing of certain kinds of animals. And now we're on a kind of continuum that looks like philosophy needs to sort. It's only the job of a philosopher, or let me say, it's something that a philosopher is well equipped to handle, these kind of continuum arguments where you say, well, on the one hand, I think it's fine to kill as many, virus, as much COVID as we can, but I don't want to kill as many people as we can. And I also don't want to kill as many dolphins, but I'm okay killing grass, and you might think there's some spot along the way, or some morally relevant distinction that makes the kind of killing that we talk about when it comes to viruses and grass, or killing plants or something like that, different.
Trees is especially relevant in Singapore.
Yeah, that's relevantly different than the kind of killing that goes into killing people and dolphins and things like that. So you're going to find that might be a metaphysical distinction, or it may just be a morally relevant kind of distinction that we could capture. And but again, those kinds of questions depend upon our having the roughly the right answer, at least a defensible answer to what things there are and what are those things. And so that's why, as I think you rightly point out, philosophers can be pretty useful in figuring out how we're going to proceed in the hard cases, I think.
And whether being alive is a good thing in the first place.
Yeah, I think there's a joke to be made there, but yeah, sure, yeah.
Don't make it. Okay, so let's tackle the second question here, a second broad question, which is connected to the nature of philosophy, but a way of asking this and answering this question can focus on what it is that we work on. So to give you a bit more of a practical example or an exhibition of what philosophy is based on what kinds of things we work on, which we're familiar with. So I'll ask Andrew the question. So what kinds of things do you work on, and how do those topics help us mark out a specifically kind of philosophical problem or philosophical area?
Yeah. So I work mainly in ethics, and so the fundamental kinds of questions in ethics are, what ought we to do, and why ought we to do those things? Okay, and there are various kinds of theories that have been proposed. You may think that what you ought to do is bring about the best world that you can. And the only way to do that is to bring about the happiest world you can. You may think that what you ought to do is respect those that are worthy of respect. And, or you may think, what you ought to do is be a good person. And so those are sort of core ideas that people have developed into full-fledged theories. And then there are various kinds of arguments that you can offer to try to defend those views. And the standard way to do that in contemporary ethics is to try to come up with various kinds of cases, either to show that those views get the right results, or more often than not, is to come up with cases that show those theories get the wrong results. If you said, look, you should respect those who are worthy of respect, and nothing else matters morally, and then just go back to this example. So, certain animals are not worthy of respect in the relevant kind of sense. And so it looks like this theory it starts to get the wrong results when it comes to, say, animals, things like that. So you come up with various kinds of cases. In the case of making the world the best place you can, you would come up with cases where that doesn't seem to be the case. So you may have a case where you could make the world the best you can, but you'd have to do something really abhorrent. Or you recognize that given your privileged position, making the world the best that you can means that you'd have to diminish yourself to the point of marginal utility, something like that. So that's a lot of the nowadays. That's how that work gets done, and I do some of that. But actually, most of what I do has to do with the intersection of ethics and metaphysics, which is a bit of older style. It's what I think people were really good at, say, in the modern period, but it kind of went out of fashion, which is you start by getting straight about your metaphysics, and then you turn over to ethics. And so
what to do based on what there is.
Yeah, exactly. So I spend a lot of time thinking about, say, the nature of action and the nature of the mind, and what it would take for you to have the right kind of mind to perform the right kind of actions, or vice versa. And so and that kind of thinking is important. And maybe I'll just give one kind of example. So you might think there's an example between what you merely foresee and what you intend to do. So this is often used when you think about in the context of war. Okay, so if you intend to bomb the munitions factory, but you know that the bombs that you're going to use are going to end up, sending a bunch of rubble on a nearby school and perhaps killing some children. Okay, so what do you intend to do? Well, you intend to blow up the munitions factory. What do you foresee? Well, you foresee that that's going to cause some casualties to children, but that's not what you intend. So those are foreseen but unintended side effects. And people put a lot of weight on this distinction. But that distinction emerges in the context of a particular theory of action that puts, a lot of emphasis on a particular understanding of intention. And it's one that actually is relatively a kind of recent innovation. So an older model of intention, of intentional action, defined it as everything that you foresee, all the known results of your actions. So there'd be no distinction between, say, bombing the munitions factory and the children being blown up or being killed by the debris on that older model, because there's no room for it. Intentions are simply defined as what all the foreseen effects of that you're going to bring about. So So that makes a moral debate end up collapsing into a kind of debate. It depends how you locate it, but it's definitely a metaphysical debate. And it may be a debate just about philosophy of mind, a certain account of intention, things like that. And so this really crucial kind of distinction that it gets deployed now, even in everyday thought and talk, rest on, at least on my view, a pretty controversial understanding of the nature of intention. So yeah, so that kind of gives a feel. Gives a feel. So what do you work on there? Maybe I answered that in a really long-winded way. Sorry.
No, it was good. I'm sure it was very useful. Well, I won't get into too many details since we do want to leave some time for the prospective students to ask questions. But I'll just indicate that, so the way that Andrew discussed and presented the material that he's working on, especially the last part, he said that he works on intention and action, what the nature of those things are, and he tries to give an account that will diverge from or answer a kind of a reigning, a commonly held assumption in an established account today. So this way of doing philosophy is very, very widespread. There's another way of doing philosophy which says, okay, let's take the question of what action or intention is, the way that, let's say, okay, Kant, Confucius, Aristotle, whoever understands this topic or a question or problem. And then we try to unearth and pull out what one of those thinkers says, or how one of those thinkers is related to another thinker, or how one of those thinkers came to believe something that he comes to believe. And so that's the more, let's say, historical way of approaching philosophy. So the area that I work on is an area within the history of philosophy, and it studies a period of time, basically from the 19th century to the 20th century, in mainly French and German language philosophy. And some of these philosophers are also interested in questions like action and intention. Consciousness is a big theme that we work on, but in a kind of historical text-based way. So here we look at more at traditions and how these kinds of philosophical questions emerge from traditions. So somebody like Andrew, for example, may read a paper by a historian of philosophy, and then maybe Andrew will be say, okay, well, here's this other view of intention in, let's say, Aristotle or Kant or whatever. Let's take out some of these implications and play with them a little bit, or see where they lead, and how that can lead us to reshape our understanding of intention in the present. So the two areas are very much complementary, but they sometimes can engage different immediate sorts of questions. So, so my own area is post-Kantian philosophies, but I won't say very much more about that. So if you have questions, you can ask more questions in the question period, which begins right now, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, thank you so much, professors. Yeah, so we're just going to be moving on to our Q&A segment. So joining me and the two professors in answering your questions, we have Shamita, who is a student ambassador from philosophy as well, and she's in year 1. So we'll be addressing the questions that were sent to us during the registration period. So those of y'all who are in our Zoom call, I understand that when y'all were registering for the call, you did send in some of your questions. So yeah, thank you so much for the enthusiasm, and we'll be touching on those questions first. Yeah, but those of you who maybe weren't able to get in your questions or are joining us on our live stream, fret not. You can still raise your questions to us. So for those in the Zoom call, feel free to just type into the Zoom chat box, and from there we'll pick out the questions as you send it in. Or if you want to directly communicate with us, you may also just talk to us directly through video call. But I do need to point out that please do turn on your cameras and unmute yourselves. And before you speak up, do click on the raise hand button so I can call your name. Yeah. And for those joining us on the live stream, if you scroll down on our microsite, you will also see the Slido application, which I see some of you have already submitted your questions. So we'll touch on some of those questions as well. Yeah, and if we don't get to any of your questions due to maybe the limited time, right? Feel free to talk to us on our live chat, which you can also find on the microsite as well on the bottom right, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. All right, so let's just move on to the questions that were submitted to us first. So I think the first question really hits home for a lot of us philosophy majors, which is there anything that can be done to change the notion that philosophy is boring and not useful? Okay, so I think I'll direct this to the professors first. So yeah, Professor Dimitri, do you have any thoughts on this question?
Well, I do, I guess. Well, we addressed some of them in the beginning. We gave some examples of the way that philosophy is useful, but one should be as direct as possible. I mean, you have to think of, okay, so what is it to be useful? Well, being useful means, on one interpretation, being applicable to some problem. So what do you need to do to solve a problem? You have to understand what the problem is, and you have to evaluate possible methods to resolve it. Well, how do you do that? You have to think. In other words, you have to use reason, use your understanding, entertain alternatives, consider implications. That's what philosophy does. So philosophy, contrary to what one may think, is the most practical of the fields, because every single field presupposes it's the kinds of skills, competencies that it cultivates. So every field will require analysis, every field will require reasoning, every field will require application of logic. We will teach that in a formal way, in a rigorous way, in written and communicated form. And so in that sense, you can understand philosophy as being the most practical field, paradoxically. Now, in terms of whether or not it's boring, well, that will also depend on your disposition. So within areas of philosophy, people don't agree, even if they're professors, let's say, about what is the most exciting area. But I will say this: philosophy is very dynamic across its periods, and so it keeps birthing new developments, and I would say that that's pretty exciting. It's also very old. It's older than all the other disciplines, so that's something, and it's still going. So, and we'll keep going for a long time, if not forever, as long as we're here, probably. I think that's pretty exciting.
Yes, thank you, Professor. Yeah, definitely resonate with that whole, it's the most practical field, surprisingly, even though it does seem very abstract, but it can definitely be applied in a lot of areas. So thank you for that. Yep, so our second question is, what is the workload and assessments like? Okay, so for this, I will just pass it on to the student ambassador, Shamita. Yeah, I think just to share with you a bit on her personal experience.
Hello. So workload depends on the modules themselves. So last time I took Intro to Philo and Symbolic Logic, and obviously that varies because symbolic logic requires a lot of practice, so it's a bit like math, I guess. But, that one was purely assignment based, so it was tests, not really essays or anything like that. But for Intro to Philo, we had essays and tests and a weekly reading quiz. So that kind of tells you that each module varies, and you can't really like spell out a specific workload. But I would say that it's rather manageable. It also depends on what other modules you choose to take. So this semester, I'm taking 3 Philo modules, and one of them is Moral Philo, the other one is Chinese Philo, and I'm also taking Philo of Science. So all of them have both quizzes and assignments. Wait, no, except for Chinese Philo. But even then, you have to learn to manage your time because it can be tough at times. Joy, would you like to answer?
Sure. So Yeah, I'm a year 2 student, so I guess I have done this maybe 1 year longer than Shamita, but still, I think the experience is pretty similar. I think a lot of people come in with the mindset that like, oh, humanities, so you just kind of write essays and that's it. Because I think a lot of people are told right from the get-go that like, oh, if you join humanities, no exam, or philo, there's no exam. Okay, but yes, there are no final exams, but that does not mean the workload is any less, I feel, because along the way we do have like class tests, and our essays are also relatively long. And if you were to go and read any philosophy text, you would know that there's no such thing as reading a philo text in one sitting. There is no way you'll understand what is going on if you just like breeze through it. So staying consistent with the readings and pretty much just understanding what is happening in the curriculum, I think that's the most substantial part when it comes to workload. Yeah, and I think how this differs from other, I guess, subject areas like social science is that there is no final exam. There is just one essay that the professors sort of give you about maybe a month to complete. So you do have to manage your time. So if you know that you're not the sort of person that can write a 2,000 word essay in one night, then you should not, right? So it's really, for you to just discover how you work. And I think the most important word for us students is really just the word consistency. Yeah.
Oh yes, to add on to that, you have to remember that there are readings. So those are not like a once in a semester thing. Those are weekly. So you have to remember to do readings or you're gonna be blurred.
Yeah. So
she's right, consistency.
take it from us students, we know. Right. So next question we have is, I think I will pass this on to Professor Andrew, is how can studying philosophy benefit me as an individual?
Great question.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, interesting question. I think you can. Okay, so if you think of it, benefit you, then the study of philosophy, you might think of these as being divided into maybe two ways it could benefit you. So on the one hand, you may have a kind of grand way of benefiting you in the sense that maybe you think that if you gain knowledge of important truths, then that could make your life better. And that you might think then is a kind of intrinsic benefit. Now, one thought is, chances are philosophy is too hard, that you're probably actually not going to gain much by way of knowledge of truths. You may have some sort of guiding ideas or something like that, but you might fall short. As Demetrius, I think, said rightly, we've been at it for a long time. There's not a lot of consensus. So your knowledge of important truths you might not actually acquire. So then you might think more about the kind of instrumental benefits that philosophy could confer on you. And those you could think of sort of in two ways. So one, you could think of a kind of set of skills you might develop. So it's often reported, and I think this has got to be right, that since philosophy is so difficult, and the kind of training that it gives you is so rigorous, you're going to be much better probably than most other areas at just thinking clearly, at writing, and at creativity, kind of ability to problem solve that goes beyond what most other areas can teach you. So those are, I think, all important kinds of skills. But again, I don't think that would be the thing that I think would really benefit you. So here's my own take on what really benefits you. My own take is that actually you could learn something, not a skill, but something of substance, which is that if you study philosophy, you're going to be studying what humans have kind of thought of as the most important questions, and we're still unsettled about them. And what's going to be made vivid to you is that how little we know about the most important stuff, and how stupid you are in the grand scheme of things. And that, I think, the kind of humility that philosophy teaches you will make you irritated when you hear politicians talk, will make you irritated when you hear people think that they really understand what's going on, because you'll have a keen awareness of the fact that these people don't know what they're talking about. And that can ground you in a really important way. Some people will go overboard and they become debilitated by this, but I think that's really important that you kind of have the humility that comes with realizing that there are really, really tough questions that even the smartest people haven't been able to answer, and they're the ones that really matter.
Great, thank you so much, Professor Andrew, for that answer. Yeah, so I think from moving on from the more general questions about philosophy, I think I'll touch base a little bit on the questions regarding admission. Yeah, so we do have a few questions regarding admission into this course. So for example, there's one question on our Slido, which is if I want to apply to APAS, so I think that's the, sorry? Yeah, the aptitude-based portfolio entry. Is there anything specific that you look out for in the personal statement and digital portfolio when it comes to admission through this platform?
Well, this is not too specific, but it's very important to make clear how your skills and are connected to your intentions in studying for this particular course. So, and anything you can make clear in terms of your background, how that contributes to potentially you doing well, that's important. But there's no kind of specific set thing.
Thank you. And I think the question that pops up the most throughout the live question entry is, what if I do not meet the 10th percentile? Are my chances of entering philosophy very low? So maybe Professor Andrew?
I think Dimitri should answer this because he knows more about the details of the...
Okay, sure. Yeah, Professor Dimitri?
Well, in general, the chances do go with one's grades. So that's the simple answer to that. However, what I will say is that things are variable from one year to the other. So somebody who is in the has a 10th percentile, whatever, 20 percentile, whatever, average or JC mark or whatever, that can be relevant, but it can maybe not be decisive. So things change from year to year in terms of admissions. So I would say this applies not only for philosophy but for everything else. If you really want to aim for a subject, unless it's so incredibly far off that you're told you have no chance at all, then you should still go for it, I think, because you never know how things will end up.
Thank you for that answer. Yeah, I think just a bit of a personal insight. I did not meet the 10th percentile when I applied for philosophy. I actually did pretty badly for my A-levels, but I think the philosophy the philosophy course looks at it a bit more holistically. So there is an interview and an exam, like a mini essay test that you have to sit for. And that, I think, honestly plays a very big part in your entry, because I've asked all my course mates, and even those who did really, really well at the A-levels also had to sit for the test. So there's no like direct entry into philosophy. Okay. And they really do look at, I guess, your skill set. So that's why you have people like me who probably would not have gotten in with my grades, but are now, in philosophy and doing relatively well. So they take on a more holistic look when it comes to admissions.
And I'll just say also, if you do come in and you feel like you have bad grades or something like this, like that, obviously in university that does not matter, because many things change from poly or from JC, and how you work, as Joy was describing, and Shamita, how you work, how you study, how you prepare for your essays and readings and so forth. So you shouldn't feel that you're at a disadvantage if you're coming from poly, for example, or anything like that. It's all what matters is what happens on day one, university.
Yes, thank you so much. So I think we're coming to the end of our session today. So we'll just take one last question, which I think is very interesting, which is what made you decide to take up philosophy? So I think for a more relevant sort of Asian Singaporean view on this question, I'll just pass it on to Shamita. Do you have any answer to this question?
So, what made me take on philosophy, right? Yeah, you get asked that. You do get asked a lot. So, well, I've always been a quite naturally curious person, and then I'll ask like random abstract questions, and people will look at me like I'm crazy. But anyway, so I realized there's this topic called philosophy, and I was like, whoa, okay, what's that about? So I searched up on it, read some stuff, and I was like, okay, this is really cool. Maybe, we could pursue this in future, especially given that at that point I didn't know what I wanted to do. So, and then I realized that philosophy like offers you a broad view of things, and it's not a very narrow-minded subject. So that kind of encouraged me to pursue the topic. Also, I think that, you're probably, if you're Asian especially, you're probably going to get asked a lot on why you would choose this dead subject or something like that. And honestly, let people talk. They're just going to keep talking. So either you ignore them or you can tell them that, it's kind of none of their business. But if it's your parents, you can't say that, right? So my parents also asked me why I chose this topic, and they still talk about it sometimes. It can get annoying, but you can choose to prove to them that it's not as stupid as they think it is. And you can also say, show them all the skills you've gained. So for example, after one semester of philosophy, my parents are like, oh, so this is what philosophy has taught you. Now you do speak better. Now you do make arguments better. And sometimes they're also, they become a bit more understanding in a sense that they realize that humanities are not as bad as they think it is, because most people are inclined towards science or business and stuff like that. And maybe your parents want you to do that, but it's also based on your interest, right? So this was my interest and I decided to pursue it, even if people didn't like it. So yeah. Joy? Or maybe the professors could answer why they chose philosophy.
Andrew, do you want to go with this one? Or
You go for it. You go for it.
Well, I don't think I have a very illuminating answer. I just I fell in love with philosophy when I first took it, I suppose, in university, and I very much enjoyed the process and procedure of grappling with ideas that were very difficult to understand, which resisted easy comprehension, and in which I have to exert a real effort to get to resolve. And I also enjoyed the textual, more, let's say, more historical, cultural side of it. I enjoyed reading the text from the history of human ideas and human culture, and that's something you can do at NTU as well. You can read classical Chinese philosophy, also more contemporary stuff, ancient, early modern, and so forth. So, and other departments in the university will expose you to other domains of human culture. So, I think philosophy this is connected to an earlier question, but I think one of the benefits of studying philosophy, what it does for you, is that it can really make you a deeper person, in the sense that it gives you a kind of inner life. It gives you resources to reflect on yourself, where you're going, why you do certain things, how you want to live your life, in a way that is informed by how other, very kind of serious minds grapple with these questions as well. So that's very valuable, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, it's always nice to hear when people enter the field with some sort of interest or passion. Just to add on, I guess, my really short input on this question, I did not. I came in not knowing philo at all. Actually, I didn't want to take humanities at all. But like I said, my results weren't good enough to take the subjects that I wanted, which were communications and psychology being my first choice. So I really just went for it because my parents were like, okay, you have to go to a local university. It doesn't matter what you do, you just got to do a local degree. So I was like, okay, sounds like humanities it is then. And I didn't take literature or history or anything in my JC because I was a science student. So I was kind of stuck in philosophy back then. I'm talking about back then. So I didn't come in with the most passionate of intentions, but since then I have really, really grown to love the subject for all the reasons that Professor Dimitri, Professor Andrew, and Shamita have stated earlier. And yeah, I ended up, even though at the end of my first year, I got the chance to switch my major to psychology, which was originally my first choice. I decided to take it on as a second major instead, and to stay on with my philosophy major, which is how much I have grown to love the subject. So yeah, you know, for those of you who may find yourselves maybe stuck in humanities, without much interest, I'm pretty sure you'll go to love it. And even if you don't, there are many other options for you to either change your major or to take on a minor or second major that you're more interested in. Yeah. All right, so that was our last question for today. Yeah, I just want to thank everyone so much for joining our session, either on Zoom or on our live stream. And if you have any more questions about our philosophy program, yeah, just do come and chat with us on our live chat platform, which if you enter our School of Humanities microsite, you can find at the bottom right. It will be me and Shamita on the live stream as well. I mean, not live stream, on the live chat. Yeah, so we'll be glad to talk to you and answer your questions. And for those questions that we weren't able to touch on, yeah, feel free to ask them to us on the live chat session as well. Yeah, or you can sign up for one of our virtual interactive sessions, which will take place between 22nd February to 26th February. So you can get to interact with some of our other student ambassadors and our other professors as well. Yeah, the schedule is also available on our microsite. All right, so thank you so much again and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.